freedom is the pure idea.
Hello and welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, the Star Wars show that takes direct psychic damage when bad things happen in the world. I'm your host, Eleanor Mueller, and with me is my co-host, Sophia Dunstan.
Hello. I also take psychic damage, but I have a different trauma response.
Yeah, it's been a busy few weeks. We've been on, shall we say, an unforced hiatus, maybe, which is allegedly due to the dip in my mental health after we elected the especially fascist guy. I can neither confirm nor deny. How you doing, Sophie?
I'm doing great. I'm having a really good time catastrophizing, basically, for the next 4 years.
It's the activity. It does seem like the thing to do. No, there's going to be a bit at the end of this episode about what to do since things are going to be bad, because I think that's important. I know a lot of our listeners are pretty scared, feeling kind of desperate. A lot of them are vulnerable, like I am, like you are, Sophie. And, you know, I want to make sure that maybe they can funnel that towards something. We'll see. So if you stick around to the end or go to the timestamp in the description, we'll kind of talk about that. You'll hear my recommendations, but, you know, better than nothing. As for me, I took some time off. I took some edibles. I did a bunch of lesbian stuff, and I am back. I don't know. The break didn't really cure me because I spent it worrying about this episode. So I don't know. I can rest when I'm dead. Or when Andor Season 2 is out. Andor Season 2 starts right when Celebration ends.
Oh, okay.
So,
well,
I'm going to want to...
We'll be busy, yeah.
I'm going to want to dead, I think. No, it's going to be good. We're going to have fun.
I can't wait to get, like, trans detected in Japan. That will be much worse than in a regular airport.
You know,
well, American airport, whatever.
Yeah, the two types of guy, regular and non-American. All right, Sophie, you know who makes it easier to survive the getting transed at the Japanese airport? Wait, not transed, clocked. Getting clocked at the Japanese airport.
By the Japanese government.
No.
Who's that, Ellie? Tell me.
It's the people who I'm here to thank today. June Alpine, May, Andrew P., Joss Jenkins, Derek Torres, Rory Mills, Yoan Pak, Valerie Reagan, Celia Glinsky, and Andrea Johnson. And an extra thanks to Dylan McGuire, Jake Desjardins, and Josh Hyam for raising their pledges. You can tell it's been a while since we did an episode, because that's a lot of patrons. They are all the plastic red arrow button that allows this toy lightsaber of a show to extend to its full length.
I am a plastic red lightsaber.
You know what? You're not a patron supporter, Sophie.
No, but they're the button that allows me to extend my podcasting.
Oh. It's actually kind of gross now that... Okay, moving on. If you're interested in early access to the show, episode outtakes, monthly-ish bonus episodes, and the Daughters of Ferrix Discord server, where I have personally been doing occasional research and productivity streams to help me stay in the groove of actually making this show, check us out at patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix. Please. I would really appreciate it. Oh, also, while I'm at it, you know, if you're in the mood, feel free to follow or subscribe to us, you know, wherever you're listening. Give us a review on Spotify or Apple. I don't think Spotify has reviews. Spotify has stars, though. Give us that. Or leave a YouTube comment telling us what you think of, I guess, this episode. Really could be anything. It doesn't really matter for the engagement. I do, for better or worse, read all of the comments. There are comments on Spotify now. I don't like it, but it's true. Yeah, go ahead. Do that stuff if you want. I'll see it. I'll appreciate it. Sophie, do you want to do like an actual episode of this show?
I do. I think it's high time.
This one took me a while to finish. Not in a it's been delayed, so it's like super good now way. It's not that Shaggy Miyamoto quote. It's I'm barely able to write about this at all for several months way. Will the time pay off? I don't know. Thanks for listening to it.
It'll probably be the best episode ever.
Yeah, this is going to be the one that people listen to. People are going to stop starting with the first episode that I hate, and they're going to start with this one. You know, this isn't going to be a perfect episode, but they could do worse. Anyway, next time we'll be back to a much more normal fare. I have something actually Star Wars adjacent to talk about. This one's a little too abstract, and hopefully when we get to the end of it, I will never have to do anything like this again. Maybe. For like a year. Prologue. What is it? What is Star Wars?
It is moderately violent space show written by our Lord and Savior George Lucas.
Not always, but sure. I will warn you, listener, I'm about to say Star Wars like 100 times over the course of this episode in much too quick succession.
Is this going to be like a philosophical thing?
Yes.
This is the telos of Star Wars.
That's the episode. Do you remember, Sophie, do you remember how we ended the last episode?
Vaguely.
This is the sequel to that.
Oh.
We did it. We made a sequel.
Wow, we're so advanced.
Okay, seriously. Bear with me. Bear with me. What is Star Wars? Is it a movie? Is it a film series? I mean, yeah, but there's TV, so it's a motion picture series, but there's also video games and comics and novels and all that bullshit, so it's a multimedia series. Listeners may have noticed in previous episodes, but I find myself being really particular about using that term, series, right? I see franchise as kind of a dirty word, because ultimately, when you're doing what we do, dissecting the inspirations and meanings behind Star Wars narratives is not about intellectual property. It's not about the little TM at the end of the advertising blurb. It's about the story. So I prefer to talk about it the same way that one talks about any collection of associated works, because that's what Star Wars is. It just happens to be a collection that is both profoundly large and quite varied in its contents. What is included in that collection? What counts as Star Wars? Well, we could take the purist route and consider Star Wars to only be things that George Lucas wrote, with a hard cutoff when he sold the thing to Disney. But, I mean, does that definitely include Empire Strikes Back, which owes its story to Lucas, but has a screenplay written by Lee Brackett and Larry Kasdan? Let's broaden the purist lens then a little more. Maybe it's only stuff George Lucas had a decision-making hand in. The original trilogy, the prequels, the Clone Wars, but also there's some stuff after the Disney acquisition, like the Clone Wars Season 7, because he did concepts for those arcs, and also probably the 2015 book Dark Disciple, which was based on scripts written by George, and also one fucking scene in Solo: A Star Wars Story. Don't worry about that.
We were doing a scene, and he was trying to stay out of the way, but he did lean over and he says, you know what Han would really do there? I said, what? Until he described the joke. He gave me a little joke, and I said, hey, guess what? Here's what we're gonna do in the next take.
You could declare that the only thing included as Star Wars is instead anything before the acquisition, and that's fine. But like a lot of people that say they do this also kind of end up liking shit like Rogue One or some episodes of The Mandalorian. They make silly exceptions for those too. You could say that the only things that count as Star Wars are officially labeled canon, but there are some things that exist in canon gray areas, like how do you account for reference materials that don't bother to distinguish canon continuity from legends? Wikipedia cites a lot of these as canon, but the discerning fan, me, might say otherwise. You could argue that for something to be Star Wars, it has to be set in the Star Wars galaxy, but that rules out like a third of the show Ahsoka and weird alternate takes like the novel Ronin. Sophie, do you want to play a game with me?
I would love to play a game. I love games.
Okay, the game is, does it count as Star Wars?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, first, A New Hope. Is it Star Wars?
Yes, Star Wars.
The Force Awakens. Is it Star Wars?
Definitely.
Okay.
Even though I don't like it, to be clear.
Sophie, you get the reviewer brain away. It's not about whether... That's not what we're talking about. Put that away. We're not nostalgia critic here.
I know. I'm allowed to have an opinion. Stop trying to cancel me.
Absolutely. It's just whenever I bring up The Force Awakens, you have to say that you don't like it, and I don't think that makes for good discourse. We're not talking about qualitative experience. We're talking about shit that's way weirder than that.
We're not reviewers, we're worse.
The novel Heir to the Empire. Is that Star Wars?
I mean, yeah, even though it's not canon.
I'm not asking about canon, Sophie. I'm asking about Star Wars.
Okay, yes, that is Star Wars.
Okay. What about the novel William Shakespeare's The Empire Striketh Back?
I love it already. Yes, it's Star Wars.
How about the 1978 Star Wars Holiday Special?
Probably, although I don't really know what that is.
You don't know what the Holiday Special is?
I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, that's good enough. Is it Star Wars?
It says Star Wars on it.
Is the theme park Galaxy's Edge Star Wars?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. What about the hyperspace hoopla Star Wars dance-off thingy they did at Disneyland in 2010?
A hoopla? Is this like a hula dancing thing, or?
It's a dance-off. They dance.
I don't know. Do they wear like stormtrooper costumes or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, then yes, I would say it's Star Wars.
What about the 2012 mobile puzzle game Angry Birds Star Wars?
We're really starting to stretch the definition here, but yes, I would also say that is probably Star Wars affiliated.
What about Angry Birds Star Wars 2? They made 2 of them, Sophie. They made 2 Angry Birds Star Wars games.
Why?
Look, I'm not expecting yellow Angry Bird Han Solo to show up in episode 10 or whatever, but I don't feel comfortable saying any of that doesn't count. Star Wars is not as narrow in scope as a film or a film series or a multimedia series or even any kind of supposedly contiguous narrative. Depending on who you ask, it's at least like 3 of those. It's messy and it's kind of stupid and weirdly commercialized at times. And it's not just stories either. It's not just narrative. You think hyperspace hoopla is rich in plot? It's not. Star Wars is a theme park, yeah, and it's stupid tie-in video games and t-shirts and VR experiences and lunchboxes and museum exhibitions and Lego sets and anything else with that fucking logo on it. That's what it feels like it kind of comes down to, right?
Yes, I think it does. Whatever the logo is on is sort of Star Wars.
Yeah, it's the brand. It's these big, bold Star Wars, like the logo type, marking something as officially licensed, a Star Wars product, which is gauche. Like that's, I don't love it as a rule, but it makes sense. It makes a lot of practical sense. This is the part of the beast that we can accurately call franchise, because that's exactly what it is. Goods or services on the market that have been licensed and branded by whatever corporate entity that owns them. That's what Star Wars is. That's what it's always been. Part 1. A thing to be played with. Sophie, the time must come when pretentious assholes like me must plunge into the abyss and admit to ourselves the truth of franchisehood. As much as some people's main introduction to the beast is A New Hope or a copy of Heir to the Empire given to them as a kid, it cannot be overlooked how, to so many people growing up with it, Star Wars was primarily plastic lightsabers and action figures. Does that sound like you, Sophie?
Yes, that does sound like me, although mine were like Lego guys, so...
Also Lego guys. Also those weird guys with the big hands. I can't remember what those are called. To quote a 2015 article from The Week magazine, the actual movies are just a cog in Disney's money-printing Star Wars machine. Fundamentally, since the very beginning, Star Wars is toys.
I love toys. I do. I love toys.
What was your favorite childhood toy, Sophie? Go.
I have this Lego Millennium Falcon, which my sister and I sort of endlessly bastardized. It has all sorts of weird stuff inside of it, but it was like the flagship for our sort of fleets of Lego spaceships that would attack each other. So it was very valuable to us, yeah.
I think you've talked about that on the show before. That's so charming. Oh my God. In 1960, Mattel Incorporated, the toy company, you know, Will Ferrell and the rest of the Barbie people, hired a dude named Bernard Loomis. Bernard. God, why do these episodes always have to talk about a man? We are always talking about a man on this show. This episode is probably the worst of that. I can think of a single woman that's cited here. Ugh, okay. Anyway, Bernard Loomis worked in the marketing department. He slaved away to give shit like Hot Wheels market dominance, you know, real important stuff. And it was at Mattel that Loomis had a revolutionary idea. What if you turn the toy ads that kids see on TV from obnoxious interstitials into the main feature? What if they made a television show that featured the toy cars they wanted to sell. This has obviously been a pretty gangbuster strategy since Transformers, Ninjago, Will Ferrell. Media based on toys to sell toys sure does work on kids. It definitely worked on me when I was the target age. Did it work on you, Sophie?
It did. Ninjago was big, but also, what am I thinking of? Not Transformers, but something kind of like it, I guess. Was also like...
Bakugan.
Bakugan. Yeah.
Was it actually Bakugan?
Yeah, my sister and I loved Bakugan.
I never had a Bakugan, but they were cool. They were cool.
We had like 6 of the little unfolding things, and we thought they were so cool.
They made a series of toys that's just Droidicas, and I think they were right for that. The 1969 Hot Wheels show aired for 2 years on ABC and followed the exploits of high schoolers in the Hot Wheels Racing Club. They race, they fix cars. I don't know, I didn't bother to watch much of it, and it's mostly lost media at this point.
Hot Wheels! Hot Wheels!
But I'm sure Mattel saw it as a notable step toward brand dominance. The Federal Communications Commission was less happy with the Hot Wheels show. They received several complaints that the episodes were essentially half-hour toy ads, which they were, of course. The FCC ruled that the network had to count the show as advertising time, which cut into the amount of commercials that ABC could sell to companies in a given hour. And they eventually dropped the show after its second season. Rip Hot Wheels Racing Club. But Bernard Loomis had already gotten out while the getting was good and became employed at Kenner Products, eventually going on to become president of the company. If you're a very clever listener, you can probably see where this is going. Loomis had a newspaper subscription to The Hollywood Reporter, and one day he saw an insert about a new film from 20th Century Fox, Star Wars. He set his people to find out more about the film, and they managed to get a few details, including one that Loomis particularly liked. The movie had robots. So they went and got the toy license. We never designed anything for the Star Wars films. None of the characters, hardware, or weapons were created by anyone but George Lucas and his people. Our job was to execute the items and add the most we could in children's play value to each product, package them, merchandise them, and advertise them. As evidenced by the Hot Wheels show thing, Loomis had a very distinct view on the relationship of toys to the media designed for the children playing with them. Indeed, Loomis is credited with coining the term toyetic to, in his words, describe the property of being expressible in playable figures and hardware.
That is a great word.
I love brand language. I don't, it's actually quite alarming. Toyeticity is essentially a concept that exists for the sake of production and marketing strategy. Again, it was coined by Loomis. He was a Kenner executive, so there isn't exactly a lot of theory to describe the quality, which means I gotta go with what I can find, and that is the writing of Agelle Wade, a former product development manager and brand vice president in various toy-centered corporations. Currently, she's a sort of industry tutor thing. She has articles and courses on her website, The Toy Coach, about excelling in the toy industry, breaking into games and whatever. I don't know if her ideas are credible. She does seem reasonably successful. She has a more popular podcast than we do, so there you go.
W for her, I guess. Or maybe L.
I always feel skeptical of analysis from corpo people, but I don't know. She outlines things in a useful way, and we're gonna roll with it because it's what I got.
Someday I might be corpo people. Will you trust my analysis then?
No, not even a little bit.
Sad. Very sad.
According to Wade, the industry royal of a toyetic brand is to make the core idea behind a product more marketable and ultimately sellable. And you can see how well your brand concept fits this mold according to her 4 principles. Are you ready for some principles?
I love principles.
The first up is conflict. Do you have a villain, a clearly designed bad guy, or another source of antagonism? This can manifest in a few different ways, right? But we don't have to belabor the point. Star Wars' love of having a bad guy team is everywhere. It's got these wartime settings. These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. Even in the prequels, when it's not as simple as the Nazi-coded empire, there's still the clearly corrupt separatists and the hordes of battle droids that are lined up like bowling pins for the good guys to mow down.
But I just got promoted!
like good guys do.
It's fine to mow people down if they're bad guys. Don't you know that, Ellie?
It's true. Star Wars taught me that.
I learned that from Star Wars and from Just War Theory. Wow.
Oh, well, one of those I'm cool with. The other one's on thin fucking ice. Okay, next, Sophie, I like this one. You're gonna like this one. Is accessories.
This is why Legos are the greatest toy ever, because accessories are so easy in Lego.
Like Lego's just like a really effective building toy. I think is actually why it's really good. Not important. Are there little doohickeys that your figures or whatever can be sold alongside? Are there weapons or vehicles or action packs with special outfits or tools? The 1980s Strawberry Shortcake dolls each came with little animals themed similarly to their companions. Strawberry Shortcake came with a pink-colored cat named Custard, though I'm partial to Blueberry Muffin's comically large mouse friend, the yellow and blue Cheesecake. I love cheesecake. For a more contemporary example, when LEGO introduced their ninja-themed line Ninjago in 2011, all the main characters had specially themed weapons, they're like throwing stars and nunchucks and stuff, that also turned into vehicles that you could build and play with if you had the sets.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They were accessory maxing Ninjago.
I'm flashing back to Ninjago. And yeah, I loved how their like stupid little like nunchucks and swords and whatever could like just become like a car.
Yeah, and then they inexplicably become one weapon that doesn't become a car, but there is a different car that is for all four of them, but they build it in a junkyard and don't worry about it. Star Wars itself has pretty iconic weapons. I mean, it's got guns, it's got laser swords. If you want a Luke Skywalker action figure or a Lego guy, there's a good chance he's gonna come with a suitable weapon, but it'll also potentially come with a Red Squadron X-Wing fighter, and hell, you know, R2-D2 as well, because he's kind of an accessory the same way Cheesecake the mouse is. Our third principle of toyeticity is if a thing is scalable. It's the degree to which a product line can be expanded. Can you keep putting out toys based on new plot lines or stories or themes? Barbie dolls have been around since 1959, but Mattel somehow keeps finding excuses to release new ones with different collections, like 1991's All-American Barbie, the mid-2000s line Fairytopia, or their long-lived Role Model series, including an extremely cool doll meant to look like former German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Thanks, Barbie.
What?
You want to see this, Sophie?
I would very much like to see Angela Merkel Barbie. I kind of want Angela Merkel Barbie. I think that would be like a very fun thing to own.
You're going to want her even more when you see the flags.
Oh my gosh. She is perfect. So it's like a younger Angela Merkel with like more hair, standing behind a glass podium, wearing like a pantsuit with a pink shirt and a poppy.
Slay.
And behind her is the German flag and a Barbie flag. And the great thing about the Barbie flag is that it has like a little TM.
It does.
Under the Barbie.
It does, under the Barbie logo.
And did you also notice that the Barbie head reverses itself in the little circle on the other side? Like, I do love that they put in that detail.
They did. That's a real flag. That's the flag of Barbekistan. I don't know if I like that I said that. While we're talking about fun Barbies, I want to stop and show you so you can appreciate this Stormtrooper themed collector's Barbie from 2020. Are you ready for this?
Oh no.
Okay, Sophie.
Oh my gosh.
There's the Stormtrooper. So, listeners, she's got like a bleach blonde fuck-ass bob.
She looks like a raver in like Berlin. Like that's what I feel like everyone in Berlin dresses like.
She does have a very German look about her, and I wonder if it's because she's dressed as a fascist. Sorry, Germans. You know, I'm American. Glass houses. No, but this lady's, she's in like black leggings with these tall, like plastic white boots that match sort of a corset thing. She has this shrug jacket that has like the rectangle, the Stormtrooper back rectangle. I don't know what that is on it. Oh, and the glasses, the goggles. She has like goggles with like green lenses that look like the Stormtrooper. I'll be honest, she's kind of serving. She's kind of, it's giving maximum fascist cunt. I really quite like her. She's a diva. I had to mention her.
I do like you saying she serves fascist cunt.
She does. Dedra Miro coded. Anyway,
our beloved.
Star Wars handles the scalability problem in a few different ways. For one, they keep releasing more movies and shows and whatever, so there you go, new toys. I also think a big part of it is the breadth of the setting itself. As much as we think of Star Wars as a machine that churns out media, there was nearly a 2-decade period across the 80s and 90s without Star Wars films. People forget this. This is important. But the source material is expansive, so you can have action figures of Leia and Han, but you can also have Hammerhead and Walrus Man and Snaggletooth, because apparently kids will settle for anything. I had a Greedo toy as a kid, and I remember playing with him at least as much as Obi-Wan.
We had this like single like Death Star trooper, and he was like our favorite.
Like with the big helmet, like the technicians?
Yeah, with the weird helmet, and he was always like a general, even though like we knew he wasn't.
Oh my god, because he was special.
And he had a hat, yeah.
Yeah. God, I love that. We'll talk about that later. Hold on to that. Hold on to that thing that you did with the Death Star trooper. It's important. So far, okay. We have conflict, accessories, and scalability. And the fourth one is air. No, the last principle here is distinct personality. Easy ways to differentiate characters and other subjects, right? This is Power Rangers shit. This is Wiggles shit. A character per color, easy to tell apart, easy to fit in their own category. I mentioned Strawberry Shortcake earlier, which features dolls themed after pastries and other baked goods. Avatar: The Last Airbender also does this. Its main pitch is people themed and colored off of classical 4 elements. Clear, easy to understand, easy to collect, and really easy to identify with. That's important. And this is actually where it gets a bit weird, because Star Wars doesn't have color-coded ninjas or characters themed after baked goods or horror monsters. I didn't write it in the script, but that's a Monster High reference. I mean, it's got lightsaber colors and, clear character designs. It's got good silhouettes. Those are important, but I don't think that's the core of how Star Wars characters manage to be distinct. So this is where it gets bad.
Uh-oh.
The archetype is a concept pioneered by analytical psychologist Carl Jung. There's a good chance you've heard of him. He's influenced a lot of people with whom I have intellectual beef.
You're kidding. No, you are not doing Carl Jung on this podcast.
Look, it just happened. It just happened,
You're
okay?
not.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good, but I am saying it's all I have in the script.
Ellie entering her Jordan Peterson era.
No, we're not doing Jordan Peterson shit. I actually cut out the bit where I talk about Jordan Peterson.
Oh, you see, I know, because if you say Jung or whatever, the logical next sense is Jordan Peterson, in my mind at least. Maybe that's because I'm
really embarrassing. Like, Jung was problematic, of course he was, but like, imagine you are an academic and your like current modern digital legacy is a hack scientist, like who cannot do it worth a damn. Like that sucks. Poor Jung, I feel sorry for him now. Anyway, Jung was a contemporary of Freud and contributed to much of the same early psychological work that set the stage for kind of the whole way we understand the mind today. Big dream interpretation guys, talk therapy, that kind of thing. Where Jung broke from Freud was in their understanding of the unconscious mind. This episode is so stupid. To Freud, the unconscious was an individual thing, a layer of impulses, wishes, and other things made undesirable and pushed down out of consciousness by way of social taboo and whatever. Violent fantasies, wanting to fuck your mom, etc., etc., etc.
Ah, yes, something normal people want to do.
Listen, that's what he said. He sure did say that. He sure did build an entire discipline
I think he was projecting.
of saying that. It does feel like projection. I will say, I think there is something interesting to be said about the Oedipus complex stuff, but I'm not going to. I'm here to talk about toys. These things are repressed and manifest through dreams and neuroses and slips and whatever. In Jung's research, he started to kind of go a different direction. He began to understand the unconscious, or at least an element of it, as something more collective, still a layer of memory and impulse that we're unaware of, but one that's shared across humankind. This collective unconscious supposedly contains primordial concepts and patterns that are, in some regard, universal human phenomena. I found that associations and images of this kind are an integral part of the unconscious and can be observed everywhere. They're not in any sense lifeless or meaningless remnants. They form a bridge between the ways in which we consciously express our thoughts and a more primitive, more colorful and pictorial form of expression. It is this form, as well, that appeals directly to feeling and emotion. These images apparently form a sort of instinctive anthropological language of storytelling and meaning-making that all of us have access to. There are personal events like birth or marriage, larger things like the apocalypse. There's also the shadow.
You will refer to me only by my name, Shadow the Hedgehog.
Which is kinda like the Freudian unconscious, like the really personal one. It's a bundle of the sorts of carnal desires and antisocial behaviors that are repressed or sublimated away from society. There's the persona.
Persona!
The appearance that's presented to the world, like a social mask. There's the wise old man, a figure that serves as a guide and represents wholeness of self. The wise old man is apparently a figure of the same sex as the self, so it can be a wise old woman too, you know, if you swing that way. The anima archetype supposedly exists for man and represents his quote-unquote feminine qualities like sensitivity and irrationality, and also something of a psychosexual relationship to women as that evolves and self-actualizes.
Ah, yes, irrationality, something inherent to women.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, a woman's trait. The animus is the inverse for woman and represents her masculine traits, like rationality and the ability to open a bank account.
Only developed recently.
Newly a feminine trait. Yeah, I hope it's clear that this shit gets kind of ridiculous at times, at least insofar as it is aggressively patriarchal. And pretty damn straight, too. Shocker. Not to say it's all nonsense, just that I'm not gonna treat Jung's word as law. I'm not gonna Jordan Peterson this shit. I will happily admit to appropriating his work for my own ends. To think something is good just because it's been reified as natural or normal or historically true is pure dumb guy shit. We're not about that here. Oh, also, the self that I've mentioned a few times now isn't like yourself. It represents the union of the conscious and the unconscious, an integrated personality. Does that all make sense, Sophie?
Not really, but yes.
That's how I feel. That's how I felt writing it. That's how I feel explaining it.
Like, I understand what he's going for, but I also feel like it's a sack of hooey. So go on.
It's got a little bit of both. All of these fucking guys are a little bit like that. But I will say, Jung like Baudrillard, the more you read, the more you kind of go, okay, maybe. And that's how I feel. So part of the idea behind these archetypes is that they manifest all over. I wouldn't be the first to do a Jungian reading of Star Wars. Think about Luke's relationship to Vader as the repressed shadow, and Leia as his animus. They start with a kind of sexual relationship, and then it turns into something like, you know, different. With the help of an old man in Obi-Wan or Yoda, I don't care, take your pick, Luke comes to terms with both his father and his sister as members of his family and by extension, parts of his identity. This allows him to become an incorporated self as he comes into his own and helps to redeem Anakin. Alternatively, Rey's anima can be understood as manifested in Ben Solo, the masculine to her feminine. Her shadow is Palpatine, the undesirable element she reckons with inside herself, and she's guided by Leia, her old woman, as Rey becomes all the Jedi. See, you can read episode 9. Y'all are just lazy. You could also probably do this for the prequels. That feels more complicated, so I'm not even gonna try. We don't have time. And obviously there is a bit of interpretive license taken, but that's part of the point. There are as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life, not in the forms of images filled with content, but at first only as forms without content, representing merely the possibility of a certain type of perception and action.
Philosophers should be shot.
Agreed.
Except my beloved,
Nietzsche?
No, he should be more than shot.
Shot a couple of times. Whoa.
Yeah, they should do the firing squad where they normally all the bullets except one are blanks. No, they just put in all regular bullets for Nietzsche.
No, Nietzsche caught syphilis and died,
Good.
he's taken care of. Anyway, I'm not going to belabor the point any more than I already have, you can see the ways in which Star Wars echoes and riffs on these ideas. In many ways, deliberately. We all know George Lucas was especially influenced by Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey guy. And Joseph Campbell was himself influenced by Young.
Womp, 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 womp.
I would say a chief criticism of Young is the one that I most see worth levying at Campbell, which is if you attempt an essential theory of meaning making, you're gonna end up square pegging some round holes, especially when you're doing that from a particular Eurocentric and even colonialist lens.
You can square peg my...
And this isn't exactly a type of theory that's falsifiable. It's really just metaphysics and vibes. That's why it sounds like hooey.
Because metaphysics are fake.
Well, metaphysics is fun, but it is bullshit. It is all bullshit. Why are we talking about this again?
Toys.
Right. Toys. Okay. God, this show is stupid. We're gonna kind of touch on the Young stuff later, but we need to wrap up this section. The ways in which Star Wars manifests toyetic personalities may well be through these sorts of primordial patterns and symbols. And so we have Star Wars conflict, its accessories, its scalability, and distinct personalities. I want to take a moment and highlight why I think these principles help us understand Star Wars on a larger scale. It's not because I care about the well-being of the brand, or I want to talk about why it's financially successful or can sell toys or whatever. I'm not a Disney shareholder. I don't want to shill for them. Frankly, talking whatsoever about industry stuff kind of gives me the ick.
I am a Disney shareholder.
Well, I'm going to lose your money. I'm sorry.
Damn.
But I think this toyetic idea can be reclaimed, not just to describe what makes a brand expressible in playable products, but a way in which Star Wars can be understood as not just a sci-fi series, but more abstractly, a thing well suited to be played with. And that this is much deeper than plastic playthings. It's psychological. But nonetheless, the popularity of Star Wars toys are important to this conversation because they show that people who like the series want to play with it. And that is an increasingly important dynamic.
Well, play with it both in the physical and sort of like in the sense that we do, where you sort of mess with the ideas surrounding it. It creates something through Star Wars that could not have been created by Star Wars.
Hold that thought, my friend.
I'm having a big brain moment.
You are. You're seeing the patterns. You're seeing the shape. You know where I'm going. You know what I'm doing. I shouldn't. You should be presenting the podcast.
Always.
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead. Write every script. Oh, you like Daughters of Ferrix? Write every script.
Well, if I'm gonna write every script, I need to get paid a little bit.
Yeah, you do need to get paid a little bit, I guess. This relationship of Star Wars toy to Star Wars story starts to go the other direction when we look at things like The Mandalorian. Showrunner Jon Favreau seems to especially like the analogy. He says, "It's honestly like turning over your toy chest and playing with all the Star Wars toys together. We're having a great time." In describing his current working relationship with Favreau, Dave Filoni explains that they get along like we're playing with our old Kenner toys. This simile of play has become literal in various ways. For example, the on-screen adaptation of elements taken directly from old Kenner and Hasbro products. Most prominently, the Imperial Troop Transport, an armored vehicle based on a 1979 toy with slots on the side designed to easily hold little stormtrooper guys. This is what happens when the people now making the thing are the ones who grew up with it. Sophie, do you want to see the Troop Transport?
I do, and I think that's very based.
It's cute, you'll like it.
Is this the thing they dropped the Dark Troopers out of?
This is not a ship, this is a ground vehicle.
Oh, this thing. This is the Star Wars Bradley.
Do you want to explain that?
The Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle is a U.S. manufactured troop carrier transport / tank thing.
Does it have pockets on the side for troops?
It doesn't, but I think there are firing ports, which is about the same.
Not as good as a toy. Think about it, U.S. Army.
But it's more practical because half of your body is not exposed to being shot.
That's a good point. I didn't really think about that. They'll be fine. They're expendable.
Well, I guess I'm glad that the Army feels differently about people than you do.
I'm not sure they do. In the Mando episode where Boba Fett makes his return, in order to visualize the fight scenes, episode director Robert Rodriguez used toys, cheap Halloween costumes, and figurines.
And since I didn't have stuntmen at my disposal, I used my Star Wars action figures, because a picture is worth 1,000 words and helped me just communicate what I was going for with the crew. And when I first showed it to John and Dave Filoni, Dave said, wait a minute, were those just action figures I saw? And I said, well, yeah, I didn't have anything else on hand. And he said, no, you don't understand. That makes it the coolest animatic ever.
So like he had them like doing like little flips and stuff and like shooting at each other, and presumably he was making pew 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 noises.
Almost exactly. Yeah, that is basically what happened. Rodriguez went on to be executive producer on the Book of Boba Fett, and that playful action figure-y mashup style definitely continued into that installment too. But The Mandalorian is a show that has received a great deal of criticism from some fans for this very quality. At times it feels about as deep as action figures being smashed together by a 12-year-old. Mando's second season is probably my favorite of the show. I think it looks good, it has a lot of good like pulpy moments, but at its worst, it's like the toy box belonging to the luckiest kid on the block, featuring a fancy new thing every week. A Bo-Katan figure, then Ahsoka, then Boba Fett, and the cowboy guy from Aftermath, and the Darksaber from the Clone Wars, and Luke fucking Skywalker. My beloved Book of Boba Fett does this too. Black Chrysanthemum, the Tusken Raiders, Hutts, the Mandalorian and his kid, Cad Bane, Yoda's lightsaber from Attack of the Clones, and Luke fucking Skywalker.
They really do just love to throw Luke Skywalker in there, don't they?
Well, he's the old main character, it makes sense. If Star Wars is a thing to be played with, is that all it is? Is it all nostalgia and toys and fluff?
Yes.
Well, I mean, no. It's not all that stuff. I mean, I like The Mandalorian. I quite enjoy the Book of Boba Fett, but you know me. You know what I'm really here for. I like the Star Wars that isn't just the knocking around of action figures. I don't watch it for a clip show of my favorite guys from the Clone Wars. I like themes. I like substance. I'm not distracted by the jangling of keys and legacy lightsabers. I want raw political stories, not just good guys blowing up bad guys. I'm a big girl, actually. I'm not like other Star Wars fans. I have matured. Part 2. Andor. When Andor came out, it was a clear kick in the teeth to the popular 2010s notion of an apolitical Star Wars. We've talked about it before, but when the show premiered, I wasn't surprised that it was good. I was surprised that it was good in a way that explicitly gelled with my values. Because that doesn't happen often.
I don't know, Ellie. I think it is political, but I don't think it's necessarily political only in a way that favors the set of values that I happen to enjoy. Because I happen to know a lot of like crypto fascists who really liked it because they saw themselves as Andor and like, anyway.
Sophie, I would argue that that is explicitly projection and we have talked about it before.
I know, but still.
Listen, I am so critical of Andor on this show because I think it's healthy for us. We're taking a little bit to marinate in it, and then we'll deal with the rest of it. I'm giving one to the people who email us and are like, can you talk about Andor more? It's been 2 years. I want to talk about other stuff. We'll talk about the new one. We'll talk about the new Andor.
When are we going to talk about like Suburbia Star Wars show?
When that show is over, if I have anything to say about it. I have little things to say about it, but they haven't really resolved any of that. The show's halfway done now. There's some cool suggestions, but I don't know. It depends on if there's like a really clear like episode we can make from it right after, but I'm not planning to do the thing that I did with The Acolyte, where we do an episode as soon as it's over. I don't think the material is there. I don't think my ideas are there, and I can't handle it. I can't handle trying to get something like that out in that time frame. And the Acolyte episode was a month after the show ended. Like, that took ages. You know, we're not a fast show.
We're a slow show. We're cool. We're like the turtle in the story.
We are the turtle in the story.
We win the race eventually.
I'm not sure about that. Andor's first season has been called revolutionary art. Anti-fascist, anti-colonialist, leftist, left-wing, post-leftist, literally communist, and so on. And yeah, I mean, yeah. Andor's first arc features a story about the overreach of corporate power in a town with a robust labor culture, over the backstory of the lead character, a man from an occupied land, an indigenous victim orphaned by industrial disaster. The antagonists are glorified mall security guards, itching to feel like important badass cops who murder their own collaborator in cold blood for the crime of walking through the street. In the second arc, the main character connects with an idealist who leaves him a manifesto for a better world. It features a bold, practical act of anti-fascist resistance, with defectors and rebels coming together to stick it to their tyrannical government and build something better, all set on the backdrop of a greedy, indiscriminate imperialist power that displaces and abuses civilians as a matter of course. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. And then, in retaliation, the state cracks down even harder. Innocents suffer. Security is tightened in the name of treating the sickness of dissent. Our lead is sentenced to 6 years of hard labor, not for his acts against the system, not as a result of the galaxy-wide manhunt for him, but because there's a mix-up, because the bureaucracy has no regard for anyone at the bottom of the pyramid. The third arc is, in many ways, a veiled critique of bloated carceral justice systems. Our hero is thrust into a high-security prison in which production is king, and the imprisoned compete against one another to survive day to day, until eventually their sentences end. Or so they think. Because they discover there is no end to their sentence. They're meant to be in the system until they die. Their hope for liberation doing nothing besides giving them something to work harder for. But the prisoners learn better. They realize they're strongest when acting together, far stronger as a collective against several dozen guards. Power doesn't panic, so the power belongs to them. At the end, the Empire is hunting for our lead, and it all comes to a fore when they forcibly occupy his hometown. Enforcers in black riot gear push against and shoot into the crowd that had the audacity to perform a funeral march for a local matriarch. And the result is violence. Not simply glorious or revolutionary, but angry, traumatic, and radicalizing.
Andor.
Andor features a story that speaks truth to power, a complicated emotional tour through the life of a man who goes from a passive participant to a political dissident. Cassian learns to oppose the state he lives under after witnessing firsthand the way it abuses its, I was going to say citizenry. I don't know.
I don't think that they have elections in the Empire too much.
No, not really. And people listened. People heard it. People care about the show. It's one of the reasons why we've found success doing what we do, because people like Andor for its politics, not just regardless of them. And as a result, one of the most relevant questions to come from audience members is, how? How did such a resonant piece of storytelling, a work so invested in its own critiques of power, happen in the first place? I'm not talking about how Tony Gilroy got brought on or Diego Luna's perspective. We've already talked about that. But aren't the radical politics of Andor a little bit beyond the pale for the neoliberal machine that is the Walt Disney Company? How is this possible? How is this allowed? Why did Disney greenlight this? And does the fact that they did undercut the message? We talked a bunch last episode about the Star Wars theme park Galaxy's Edge. It was a lovely excuse to do that kind of topic. It's outside my wheelhouse. I like to change it up a little. Part of the joy of this show is the ability to look at aspects of Star Wars that aren't normally afforded analytical consideration. You guys ask me why we don't talk about stuff like Andor more. It's because it's cool to talk about weird shit. And Galaxy's Edge is genuinely neat. You know, the people who made it clearly wanted it to be special. That's probably worth talking about. But theme parks are also pure artifice, and it's hard to talk uncritically about them. So I introduced the idea of Baudrillardian hyper-reality, that our social order is composed of symbols upon symbols stacked so high with deferred meaning and sign value that the result is a kind of meaninglessness. And it would be wrong to try to address that without acknowledging its source. Part 3. The source. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. This quote serves as the first line of Mark Fisher's seminal 2009 book, Capitalist Realism. It is, on the whole, a descriptive text, putting names to a certain malaise that comes with living in the contemporary world. In the past, we lived under Fordism, a capitalist system in many ways characterized by the sorts of factory work that gave way to original Marxist thought. If you're familiar with the tension Marx described between the owning class and the working class, this is what it was based on. This is where we get ideas like alienation from the product of your labor. But we're not really there anymore. We live in post-Fordist or consumer capitalism, and that's where it gets more insidious. Work and life become inseparable. Capital follows you when you dream. To function effectively as a component of just-in-time production, you must develop a capacity to respond to unforeseen events. You must learn to live in conditions of total instability or precarity. Periods of work alternate with periods of unemployment. Typically, you find yourself employed in a series of short-term jobs, unable to plan for the future. As a result of these conditions, a post-Fordist workforce is hyper-individualist and atomized. A form of nomadism becomes the managerial norm. The family in post-Fordist capitalism is in a kind of contradictory place. On one hand, the nuclear family is required as a key means of reproduction, both having kids to provide future workers and also offering emotional and social support for current workers that have to endure its conditions. On the other hand, capitalism undermines the family. It denies parents significant amounts of time with children and forces individuals into these strained, singular emotional support systems as other systems themselves are undermined, which is just one of the ways the system takes its toll. Mark Fisher cites the work of psychologist Oliver James in his book, The Selfish Capitalist, describing the way, quote-unquote, psychiatric morbidity, that is to say, phobias, depression, and neuroses, rose in the late 20th century, particularly in those countries that enforce what he calls selfish capitalism. Quoting from James, "In the entrepreneurial fantasy society, the delusion is fostered that anyone can be Bill Gates. Never mind that the actual likelihood of this occurring has diminished since the 1970s. The selfish capitalist toxins that are most poisonous to well-being are the systematic encouragement of the ideas that material affluence is the key to fulfillment, that only the affluent are winners, and that access to the top is open to anyone willing to work hard enough, regardless of their familial, ethnic, or social background. If you do not succeed, there's only one person to blame." The uptick in poor mental health among the populace is well known, and naturally, some of that is due to changes in diagnostic practice and public understanding of those issues. None of this is to say that mental illness isn't a neurological affair. God, do I know it is. But as Fisher puts it, all physiological diagnoses serve to identify is that there are serotonin deficiencies, for example, and that they ought to be treated medicinally. There's little movement around the question of what causes these deficiencies in the first place. Why do some people have these low levels of serotonin? Well, they're just like that. This answer has two primary outcomes. One, the depoliticization of mental illness, which is to say, it's considered an individual chemical problem and not a social or economic one, which contributes to a further atomized workforce. The onus is on you, not your society. And two, it creates a bountiful market for healthcare and pharmaceuticals that big, highly profitable companies can further and further exploit. Will that be cash or card? Capitalist realism is the sense that there is no escaping our current system of capital. It's so wide-reaching and pervasive that we now understand it as an indelible part of human existence. Meaning and belief is collapsed into aesthetics. All that remains is the consumer spectator, with ironic distance to shield herself from the harm of raised expectations. In order to justify the current order, it can't be called wonderful because everyone knows that's not true. So instead, it's everyone else that's horrible by comparison. We're protected from the sort of authoritarianism present in China, the line goes. So I guess it's fine that outside of our homes, we're under near constant surveillance by security guards and police. We're not all living under abject poverty like people in, Sierra Leone, so we must be fortunate to live in a profoundly inegalitarian society. Quoting Elaine Badiou, "Sure, they say, we may not live in a condition of perfect goodness, but we're lucky that we don't live in a condition of evil. Our democracy is not perfect, but it's better than the bloody dictatorships. Capitalism is unjust, but it's not criminal like Stalinism. We kill Iraqis with our airplanes, but we don't cut their throats with machetes like they do in Rwanda." Capitalist realism inevitably is magnified beyond workplaces and individual thought into non-corporate institutions as well. Consider what Fisher calls a business ontology, wherein it's treated as natural that everything around us should be run like a business. Healthcare? Make it a business. The post office? If it's not profitable, it's not necessary. A country should be run like a company. Politicians should be good businessmen. And obviously the best way to operate schools is like a company. The administration should return the highest possible profit to its shareholders. Never mind, of course, how very confused the school as marketplace metaphor is. Are students the product of the school company or the customers? The drive to assess the performance of workers and to measure forms of labor, which by their very nature are resistant to quantification, has inevitably required additional layers of management and bureaucracy. What we have is not a direct comparison of workers' performance or output, but a comparison between the audited representation of that performance and output. Inevitably, a short-circuiting occurs, and work becomes geared toward the generation and massaging of representation rather than to the social goals of the work itself. In the early 1930s, Stalin was well into the USSR's first five-year plan, a series of economic goals designed to implement a revolution from above, intending to aggressively develop the Soviet Union's agricultural economy to a collectivized industrial one, transforming the USSR into the powerhouse state they believed it ought to be. Part of this plan was to build a canal, a waterway to connect the Northwest White Sea with the inland Lake Onega to improve Soviet shipping capability. And they used the forced labor of political prisoners in order to do it. Yay! We love the Soviet Union. There was an issue, though. Well, another issue. Because Stalin's goal wasn't to create a functional shipping canal, it was to make an emblem of development in the form of a shipping canal. So they pushed the workers to complete the canal as fast as humanly possible, and consequently, they weren't given the time or means to build something safe for then-modern cargo ships. It was just too damn shallow. The canal could support tourist ships, though, which chugged on through, carrying passengers who could ooh and ah at the glorious work. The White Sea-Baltic Canal was a PR victory, a symbol of Soviet prosperity under Stalin's rule, and the success of the five-year plan. But it wasn't actually useful. It was all vibes with no substance, such that still today, according to the canal's Wikipedia entry, its economic advantages are limited by its minimal depth of 3.5 meters, inadequate for most seagoing vessels. Sometimes you can't beat Wikipedia, man. Ostensibly, the ideological opponents to the USSR were those capitalist countries that decried it for its inefficiency and bloat. Socialism can't be the way, they cried. The bureaucracy would strangle us all. In the 80s, with Reagan in the US and Thatcher in the UK, austerity hawks claimed that free market economics would be the grease in the wheels to eliminate bureaucracy itself. Neoliberalism was the game, and austerity was its name. A small, functional government, run like a business, in stark contrast to the institutional sclerosis of Stalinist Russia. And that was a fucking lie. Or it sure didn't go that way. At the very least, consider the ways in which the forces of both neoliberalism and neoconservatism both eschew the type of small government they valorize when push comes to shove. For the former, recall the bank bailouts of 2008. For the latter, lobbied for restrictions on personal expression, healthcare, and expansions of military and police power. And that's not even starting on the issue of bureaucracy. Instead of disappearing, bureaucracy has changed its form, and this new, decentralized form has allowed it to proliferate. The persistence of bureaucracy in late capitalism suggests that the way in which capitalism does actually work is very different from the picture presented by capitalist realism. It's a simulation. Symbols of achievement and development expressed through quasi-Stalinist initiatives. Hollow agendas, outcomes, mission statements, action plans, committees considering committees, performance reviews, the valorization of productivity and its related symbols regardless of any actual development that occurs. As an example, Fisher describes the bureaucratic requirements surrounding undergraduate degrees in British university systems. For the degree program as a whole, academics must prepare a program specification, as well as producing annual program reports which record student performance according to progression rates, withdrawal rates, location and spread of marks. All students' marks have to be graded against a matrix. This auto-surveillance is completed by assessments carried out by external authorities. The marking of student assignments is monitored by external examiners who are supposed to maintain consistency of standards across the university sector. Lecturers have to be observed by their peers, while departments are subject to periodic 3- or 4-day inspections by the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. If they are research active, lecturers must submit their best 4 publications every 4 or 5 years to be graded by panel as part of the research assessment exercise replaced in 2008 by the equally controversial Research Excellent Framework. These are only very sketchy accounts of only some of the bureaucratic tasks that academics have to perform, all of which have funding implications for institutions. This battery of bureaucratic procedures is by no means confined to universities, nor to education. Other public services, such as the National Health Service and the police force, find themselves enmeshed in similar bureaucratic metastases. After the Berlin Wall fell and capitalism finally lost the last of its alleged opponents, the world became very different. In the previous decades, the challenge was external. How ought capitalism bottle up or control forces outside itself? But after the Soviet Union collapsed, it gained the opposite problem. They did the first thing a little bit too well. For capital to grow, it requires a frontier. How can the system function without anything to colonize, to appropriate? Well, the system doesn't function as is, at least as its advocates claim it ought to, but the pretense of functionality must be maintained, and the price of appearing functional is quite high. No longer is subversive media adopted and absorbed. Instead, it's pre-corporated, preemptively shaped and inspired within capitalist culture. We talked about this last time. Alternative is just another genre, another series of things to buy, dominant styles within the mainstream, endlessly performing vintage defiance like it's the first time it's being done. Look at how I'm dressed. What once was rebellious is now aesthetic. Once deeply political modes of being are now just another marketable identity you can adopt. Chapel Roan.
God, what have you done?
End of explanation. The symptom of pre-corporation is a mindfuck, and it's that forms of anti-capitalism are widely circulated throughout capitalism. The example Fisher provides is the Pixar film WALL-E, in which Earth is a wasteland, covered in trash and barren of plant or human life. The very robots there to clean it up in relative disarray. The humans that are in the film, having escaped to space aboard a luxury starliner, depict a very late 2000s fat-phobic anti-consumerism. They're portrayed like grown-up babies. They don't walk, they spend all their time on the computer, they drink all their nutrients through plastic straws. Septuacentennial cupcake in a cup. I've watched that movie. I didn't even have to check anything writing this section. I know how it goes already. What force is responsible for this desolation? A fucking megacorporation, by and large, a sort of proto-Amazon Walmart monstrosity. They implicitly profit all the way to global Dust Bowl. They're the sole arbiters of humanity for at least the near millennia they're stuck on spaceships, and they lie to the humans on those spaceships to conceal just how utterly they fucked the planet.
Because at B&L, space is the final frontier.
Ultimate victory in the film is won over a robot that's specifically following company directive. And it's in a Disney movie. The film performs our anti-capitalism for us. This doesn't undermine the system, but instead reinforces it, manufacturing consent for the dissatisfied while still limiting anti-capitalist imagination. It doesn't reckon with the true horror of climate catastrophe, which is that if the megacorps keep on their natural trajectories, the result won't be a cushy 700 years of vacation, but mass extinction. Pure apocalypse. How's that for an archetypal event? What we have here is a vision of control and communication much as Jean Baudrillard understood it, in which subjugation no longer takes the form of subordination to an extrinsic spectacle, but rather invites us to interact and participate. Dissent isn't silenced, it's incorporated. What is Andor in this conception? A pacifier. A way to make those of us who recognize the noose around our necks relax long enough for it to fully tighten. It's not a conspiracy. No one made it this way on purpose. It's a natural consequence of the only thing that could have made it. Film and television are interdisciplinary art forms. They require tremendous amounts of manpower and other resources. Artistic production like this isn't pre-capitalist. We've all heard the 90s-tastic criticism of artists who sell out, but I caution you not to get nostalgic about an imaginary lost age when you can make expensive shit untainted. It's all a part of it, and always has been. It's why theme parks, no matter how cool conceptually, feel the way they do. I'm gonna complain about people posting, so forgive me for a moment, but this script was written very much after the 2024 presidential election, and I saw so many people in the week afterward, so many of my friends, posting quotes and images and videos from Andor as a cathartic means by which to say, this fucking sucks and we shouldn't keep doing it. But are you gonna do anything? Are you gonna put in the work? Or are you just using the language and aesthetics of anti-fascist resistance to make yourself feel better? I'm not saying you gotta be Wilman Pock out there, but let's at least be honest with ourselves. Fuck it. Let's go even further. Consider where Andor leads us to. The overthrow of the Empire, sure, but what happens next? Neo-republicanism, the, at least aesthetically, implicitly, neoliberal New Republic. What does that tell us as an audience? According to Fisher, capitalism seamlessly occupies the horizons of the thinkable. What's left? Hey, quick thing here. I had to record this part after Sophie left. I had to rewrite some stuff. So that's why it looks different. That's why it might sound different. Deal with it. This is what I got for you. Love you. Part 4. What is it about? I think in the 70s, you could say Star Wars is the tale of Luke Skywalker and how he fought Darth Vader in the evil empire, right? But as storytelling continued into the 80s, those lines grew a little bit muddier. Books like 1983's Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, set before A New Hope, don't spotlight Luke whatsoever. In the 90s, the expanded universe continued after Vader's death and complicated what fighting the Empire meant, going so far as to have ongoing antagonists that weren't Imperial. 1995's Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina just features short stories about dudes from around the cantina.
Glupshitos, as we call them.
Literal glupshito, like not rebels, not Jedi, just fuck-ass guys.
We're wanted men. I have the death sentence on 12 systems.
I'll be careful.
Those stories are contemporary with Luke Skywalker and the Death Star, but they have fuck all to do with them. We could, as always, do the annoying thing and say, oh, those books are for huge fucking nerds and they don't really count, which is fair, I guess. Like, that's not wrong. But, you know, that's boring. And we don't get to say that anymore when we get to the prequels in 1999, because Star Wars is recontextualized to be about Darth Vader. This is a very common view of the series, particularly in the decade after Revenge of the Sith. Star Wars is this 6-episode story of the rise and fall and rise again of Anakin Skywalker, Jedi Knight, Chosen One, yada, yada, yada. This is how a lot of people think of it, except for weird shit like the comics that focused on bounty hunter Aura Singh or side character prequel Jedi. But again, those are mostly contemporary with the films, so we can hand-wave all of it by saying it exists to provide context to tell the story of Anakin and his children, right? This is the Skywalker stuff, so it all counts. But like, Knights of the Old Republic has fuck all to do with any Skywalkers. It's set 4,000 years before. It's got Jedi, it's got spaceships and droids, but no one we know is around. Even Yoda's still a twinkle in his great-granddaddy's eye, right? And a lot of George Lucas-y purist dorks tend to make an exception for Knights of the Old Republic, mostly because they like played it and think it's cool. Because it is, it's a good game. Obviously, it's not just KOTOR, you know, there's other stuff detailing Sith Wars and all that bullshit too. There's the Old Republic MMO, Tales of the Jedi, the comic, not the show. Reference books like Essential Guide to Warfare that concern themselves with detailing ancient history for basically the hell of it. And this is all before Disney decided to make Star Wars another one of their cash cows. Star Wars isn't even the story of this one setting, the galaxy far, far away, because there's so much stuff that isn't canon to other stuff, but it's still obviously Star Wars. The easiest examples to me are the animated shorts produced under the Star Wars Visions label, right? The funky lightsaber umbrella wielded by the scary Sith lady in the duel was not written to be consistent with any other Star Wars.
You need to run. You'll never be able to beat her.
Well, that's why it's Visions.
Yeah, that's the point. You know, you can ask, why do these bandits wear bits of First Order trooper armor? You know, despite the setting containing an implied fuck ton of Sith Lords. Is it because there's a resurgence in the Sith Order after the fall of Palpatine and the rise of Skywalker? And also things look especially Japanese now? No, the reason is, don't worry about it. This is not this, but both relate to one another and form a larger whole. Star Wars is deeply anthological, and the way we understand Star Wars should be along these lines. It has core texts, of course. There will always be things like the original trilogy that serve as primary template and inspiration, though notably that template is not always the original trilogy, and perhaps increasingly so. The dispersity of these works, together with their apparent and ongoing relationship to one another, has led many fans and commentators to saddle Star Wars with a curious charge. That it is, as a story, mythological. Like antiquated tales of gods and heroes, Star Wars supposedly serves as cultural myth.
So this is coming back to my theory of everybody is replacing religion with something, and Star Wars is one of those somethings.
No, it isn't. You're wrong. You'll see.
I am right, though. No, look, it's part of the human makeup, whether you believe religion is true or not. For some reason, there is an evolutionary advantage in believing in devoting yourself to something. And everyone is either devoting themselves to politics or to fandom or to, I don't know, shit posting on Twitter.
I think it is deeply Christocentric to see that as a replacement of religion. Because religion, as we conceive of it, is a very specific thing from a very specific time period, the last, 1,000-odd years. And there was something before that. And, there were types of belief, but...
Well, right. But my point is not that, this is a direct analog. My point is that people have historically made meaning using the supernatural, and now they are in a postmodern age using the natural. And that's the simple point of the argument, divorced from religious terminology.
What makes something a myth depends wildly on who you ask. As described by a guest editor of the journal Folklore Forum, it must be admitted that such a state of semantic disarray and/or ambiguity is truly extraordinary. So we've got our work cut out for us. Oh, also, I'm not going to bother to distinguish between folklore and myth. We're basically not talking about the former at all, so I reckon we've got enough on our plate as it is. In his essay on defining myths, Professor of Classics G.S. Kirk names a handful of universalistic theories of what myths are. There's the 19th century nature myth school, or the idea that all myths are what's called ideological. They offer an explanation for an element of the world. Think creation myths depicting how the world came to be. Anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski said that myths exist to reify social practices, a charter for societal functions and norms. I previously mentioned Freud's conception of the unconscious mind, and it's worth adding that he considered myths to depict further articulations of those unconscious repressed impulses. Jung, too, built his archetypal psychological model partially based on what he saw as recurrent patterns in human expression throughout history. G.S. Kirk, however, says that each of these theories is bunk, at the very least, for their attempts to present a universal answer for what myths are. He writes that each theory can be negated by citing many obvious instances of myth that do not accord with the assigned origin or function. All we have to do to disprove the idea that myths are necessarily ideological is to point at ones that aren't. For example, Greek myth may contain explanations for phenomena like the changing of seasons in the story of Hades' kidnapping of Persephone. But I reckon you'd be hard-pressed to find a notable origin story anywhere in the story of Tiresias, who was force-femmed by the gods, at least according to one account.
No, I think that there's a very good meaning able to be found in that.
No origin story, it seems. Tiresias was turned into a woman after attacking some snakes. I guess after 7 years, he was changed back.
Sad.
And a further story holds that Hera and Zeus went to Tiresias after this and asked him, between men and women, who has more pleasure during sex? Tiresias said women, for which he was struck blind.
No, I think that this is an origin story of a lot of things in our society right now, to be completely honest with you.
The writer's barely disguised fetish. For the record, take it from somebody who knows both. Tiresias was correct. The wide range of morphological and functional variation suggests that the mental and psychic processes of myth formation are themselves diverse. How can we classify myth, then? In Kirk's words, it seems that traditional oral tale is the only safe basis for a broad definition of myth. And it's this charge of traditional, not to mention this oral stipulation, that could be Star Wars' disqualifying factor. God, imagine not meeting an oral stipulation. I
think Star Wars is getting pretty traditional at this point. There are 2 or 3 generations of passing this down from parent to child at this point.
Well, and maybe that is not enough. It is worth saying, according to Kirk, this framework disqualifies any supposed modern myth altogether. And this is a line in the sand drawn by a lot of theories of myth.
So if in 1,000 years people are still watching Star Wars, do you think he would qualify it as a myth?
No, because I think he'd be dead.
Well, you know what I mean, but would his framework...
Would he think that his framework applied?
Yeah, if he was...
Well, no, because he'd be dead.
Okay, but in a hypothetical situation, if he was living 1,000 years in the future and people have been watching Star Wars for 1,000 years, would it qualify as a myth?
I'm going to go with probably, but not necessarily.
Fair enough.
Again, oral tradition, but what that is changes, and we are, talking about it. It's this modern ancient myth division that science writer Philip Ball takes issue with. In his book, The Modern Myths, a source I discovered by typing the words modern myth into Google and clicking on the third result, he describes the way in which myth definitions, as concept, so often invite the theorist to portray myth as other, as primitive and separate. We here in the developed world don't have myth. That's the territory of ritual, of gods, of the nonsensical occult. Rituals in the developed world lack spiritual content for the most part, lack belief. We just do shit like marriages and funerals because that's the social norm. Religion is like a different thing in this conception. Our gods are metaphorical, like money or celebrity. Our cults are understood as brainwashed lunatics. We think of ourselves as evolved past the need for mythology, such evolution occurring probably sometime around the Enlightenment when we supposedly ditched superstitions in the past for science and reason.
I wish we had.
This picture is tenacious, and I suspect it accounts for much of the resistance to the notion that anything created in modern times might deserve to be called a myth. To accept that we have never relinquished myths in myth-making might seem to be an admission that we are not quite modern and rational. The truth of the matter is that, in a lot of ways, cultures of the past weren't as different from our own as we like to think. Ancient peoples weren't exclusively God believers and cultic worshippers. Myths retold weren't always considered necessarily factual. Did Homer exclusively believe he was writing an account of history, even when he's talking about the goddess Athena intervening in the Trojan War? There's compelling scholarly debate to be had about this, and that can't be neatly resolved by throwing up our hands and saying, well, they were just so silly back then. We love to talk about pre-Enlightenment societies in this way as an easy means to prop up our current order as just and wise, but people are people, and for all our developments, it's still the same stuff under the hood. It makes me think of the work of historian Eleanor Janega, who counters popular narratives about a simply backwards medieval period. It is, as I hope our listeners know, more complicated than that. Another reason people might hold some hesitancy around the idea of modern myth is, frankly, because of what could fall under that umbrella. Philip Ball uses the example of the 2004 film Van Helsing, a piece of storytelling that is, in his opinion, worth exploring for its relationship to myth-making, but nonetheless is not especially highbrow.
You are too late, my friend. My children live.
Then the only way to kill them is to kill you.
It's a silly action horror flick. It's filled with CGI monsters and Dracula garbage. It also takes itself like way too seriously.
Hell yeah.
Have you seen Van Helsing?
No, but I like the idea of it.
Yeah, you would like it. I don't know if you're supposed to like Van Helsing. One reviewer went so far to describe it as a jarring and prolonged audio-visual wankfest. But as we've discussed in the past, that a piece of media is hokey or bad isn't really a disqualifier from that media being significant. I don't especially like Shakespeare most of the time, but it doesn't mean the dude's writing isn't worth studying. And we as a species don't reserve meaning making only for those things that get a good score on Metacritic. We're dealing with massive questions here. Need we really be constrained by something as quotidian as taste? Looking out for you, Angry Birds, Star Wars. I got your back. To admit that stories can become myth in the contemporary age is in many ways to admit that we might not have, to borrow a phrase from Ball, resolved all the dilemmas of human existence. But Ball also says that it would be wrong to assume that modern myths serve as a sort of substitute or replacement for religion. That would be to fall for another category error, for religion might be regarded as a particular social and institutional embodiment of myth and not vice versa. Religion explores some of the same questions about life and death, meaning, suffering, and fate, origins, and so it is not surprising that we will find our modern secular myths still returning to religious themes, questions, and experiences.
Facts and logic, Sophie owned.
I told you it was gonna come up.
Oh, I'm glad it did.
I'm attempting to be thorough. I did work really fucking hard on this script, I just didn't finish it.
Yeah, well, it is 32 pages long, so that's like half a book.
Part of that is notes. I have notes on my end. Yeah, I started this one like 2 or 3 months ago, and it's just kind of gone through a lot of like maceration and stuff.
Maceration is a good word.
Yeah, it's good for strawberries. You macerate strawberries in the sugar, and then they turn into yummy. That's how I do it. Myth is not tidy. To expect it to be tidy is to attempt to conform the entire mess of human culture and tradition into simple explanations. Ball attempts to solve the question of modern myth by describing something he calls the mythic mode, a manner of storytelling characterized by the presence of social or psychological dilemmas. Does it speak the unspeakable? Does it lie within uncertainty and confront us with our own limitations? He claims that ambiguity is the defining feature at the heart of myth. It's easy enough to conceive of stories where a heroine fights back against fascist robot overlords or tentacled demons. It's quite another to make those monsters Miltonian, to make us question whether it is the hero we should be cheering on. It's one thing to make the demon repulsive, another to lace that repulsion with sexiness. Awesome. He compares this model to Jung's idea of the visionary novel, a primordial story that comes from the hinterland of the mind, something that, in his words, allows a glimpse into the unfathomed abyss of what has not yet become.
How delightfully pretentious.
Jung.
No, I do quite like the idea of myth being defined as something that challenges the social sort of order. In that case, Andor is a very good myth, and I don't know, that was my main thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is the ambiguity there of whether or not it's about crypto-fascists.
Yeah, it's actually about the white nationalist front of Idaho rising up against the woke mob.
Exactly. Well, no, if Andor were bad, he would look into the camera and tell you what he's the exact type of communist I am, right? But it's not bad. It lets you figure out that he's the exact type of communist I am.
Yeah, but no, I thought he was the exact type of X that I am, so...
Fascist?
Oh, fuck off. You heard it here first, guys. I'm a fascist because I believe in the state.
Wait, hang on. Anarcho-primitivist. Nazbol.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm sort of like a homo-nationalist, sort of.
Well, that one's actually true.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm actually a homosexual Zionist.
In many such cases.
I think that the entire Bay Area should be reserved exclusively for the use of gay people.
Oh, see, homosexual Zionist is an actual thing people are, so.
Is it? Oh, that's strange.
There's not homosexual Zion. There are fucking racist-ass gay freaks.
Okay, that's fair. That's the entirety of Denver.
Zionism is not a word that can be well adapted to the concept of Zion. It's a wonder we got it from the Mormons.
I think they were I think the audience understands what I mean, though. I think that gay people should have a homeland, and
you overestimate how many of our audience are not Star Wars people.
Oh, that's true. Okay, well, my official position is then not homosexual Zionism. It is homosexual nationalism, which is where gay people get their own country, preferably somewhere with nice weather.
There you go. Homosexual. God, what's the? I'm not. We're moving on. Okay, we talked about ambiguity, right? But the plot kind of thickens here. Myth works best when this ambivalence is not just illustrated by, but actually felt by the author. Just as people once felt, and I suspect many still do feel, ambivalence toward their gods. Where there is no ambivalence, there is no myth-making, but only another installment of the Star Wars franchise. I'd like to say, kind of as an aside, I really quite appreciate when someone in a thing I'm reading references Star Wars, because, you don't expect this reading a thing like this for me. You're just going into it, and then it's like they're doing my work for me. I get to go from writing scripts for this dumbass show and just kind of citing people to actually being in dialogue with them. It's very fun. And Ball doesn't think Star Wars counts. And, maybe he's right. Star Wars is not super invested in some types of like ambiguity. It dabbles in what Tolkien called the consolation of the happy ending. God, wish that were me. And I mean, let's be kind of honest here. Often the mythology label is applied just for the sake of explaining the relationship of one piece of Star Wars media to all the others. It's like myth. It's like stories with old patterns and recurring characters and contradictions. And that's fine. That's acceptable shorthand, but that's really just a series of intertexts existing within a larger semi-closed intertextual apparatus. which is a lot less catchy.
That is so academic. To be clear, that was an insult.
You're welcome. 2 a.m. Ellie. Philip Ball holds that there's a difference between something that uses the aesthetics or tropes of mythology and a proper modern adherent to his mythic mode. As he puts it, a modern myth is not an old myth retold in modern times. Star Wars references and draws from the hero's journey, cool, but that's not enough. That's not myth making. New myths, genuine modern myths, have no such template. They aren't wrought with a mythopoeic aim in mind. I don't think anyone has ever sat down with the express intent of writing a modern myth and actually succeeded in doing so. These stories could not have been told in earlier times, because their themes did not exist yet. Modern myths explore dilemmas, obsessions, and anxieties specific to the condition of modernity. Here's where I have to show my hand. Here, I don't know about this. Maybe it's my embarrassingly pro-Star Wars bias showing through here.
I would say endearingly pro-Star Wars bias.
Thank you. And maybe I'm just misreading the text. You know, that's possible. But I don't think that distinction matters. Or at least I don't think this like specific to condition of modernity, I don't think that precludes Star Wars entrance into some kind of imagined mythic canon. Is Star Wars that lacking in ambivalence? I mean, Luke doesn't end Return of the Jedi in a simple place. I've heard all sorts of readings of that. And can't we take a page out of Kirk's book and ask if we can be certain that all myths hold to this standard of ambiguity? And he says the Star Wars franchise, but do we get the sense that Ball is talking about anything besides the original trilogy? And were we just saying that the distinction between myth-making of ancient and modern times is at least a little bit arbitrary? Sure, there are dilemmas experienced that are absolutely new to the species. We were also just discussing capitalist realism, but are modern conditions really so different? Philip Ball isn't the only one to deny Star Wars the myth title. Scholar of cinema Kevin J. Wetmore does the same in his book, The Empire Triumphant. For all of the assertions of the mythic aspect of Star Wars, it is not quite the new American mythology, as it serves many, but not all, the functions of myth. Which, yeah, probably. Wetmore's subsequent argument is actually based on some Campbellian nonsense that I don't really care about right now. You can't make me talk about Joseph Campbell more, I won't do it. But he adds something else in his final paragraph, a last nail in the coffin, the truest problem. Myth is communally owned. All myth-having cultures members are free to understand and experience their myths, even reinterpret them and rewrite them. Reinterpretation and rewriting of myth is the basis of Greek tragedy, as well as much of Renaissance art. Never before has myth been the sole legal and intellectual property of one individual, who may add to or change that myth at will. Never before has myth had a team of attorneys charged with maintaining those intellectual property rights. Myth has always had marketing, and even it might be argued action figures. The modern myth of Star Wars allows no reinterpretation, no rewriting, no variation of myth. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of Star Wars.
I don't know how I feel about that.
It's complicated. It's a complicated claim. Wetmore isn't simply wrong here, right? This is literally true. Star Wars has lawyers.
Wow. A deep insight.
Neither is Ball. Neither is Fisher. Like, I agree, guys. We live under a bleak, kind of miserable order of Baudrillardian hyperreality. Symbolism is king and capital is its queen. I'm not going to disagree with that. I have no desire to. I want a better world. But adopting the aesthetics or identity of opposition is just another way it fucking gets you. What is Star Wars? Star Wars is the intellectual property of the Walt Disney Company. It's a brand they stick on Angry Birds in order to funnel more money to their shareholders. But I don't think it's good enough to just throw up your hands, say that it's so, and leave it at that. It doesn't all have to hold true today. Capitalist realism was released in 2009. WALL-E is nearly 17 years old. Half the people I cite in this episode are dead as shit. Baudrillard hasn't seen the world today, but I have. Because Star Wars doesn't belong to Walt Disney Corp. I mean, yeah, like, the ability to sell it for profit does, but that's stupid. I don't give a fuck about that shit right now. We're talking about the relationship of art to audience. Bob Iger has no goddamn say in what I do and how I watch these fucking movies. I can damn well understand and reinterpret them how I like. Star Wars belongs to the people that give a shit about it. the people who want to play with it.
This is what I was talking about earlier. It's like the stupid Death Star trooper with his big hat who became a general because he had a cool hat. And I don't know, fanfic, which you have here.
Yeah, I mean, Sophie is slightly read ahead here. This is why, despite it being historically derided by so many men in fandom spaces, fanfiction is so important. It is the clearest and legally grayest means of transformative fan work currently alive in our culture today. It's one of the chief means by which story becomes reified into culture. Sure, Star Wars was responsible for the rise of modern blockbuster cinema, but you know what else it inspired? Mpreg.
Oh.
In fanfiction, the earliest example of male pregnancy in fanfic on fanlore.org is an Empire Strikes Back fic called A Corellian Condition from the year 1980. It's not highbrow, but that's fucking real. Culture is not synonymous with media, nor with art. It's what happens when you do something with it. That's how shit happens. This is traditional oral tale in a digital age. Mpreg. I'm not saying we all need to go out and read Omega Luke writing Alpha Han or whatever. But I am saying that we need to be honest with ourselves about how common transformative work is when it comes to this shit. I enjoy Star Wars canon. I like playing the little fiddly game where we ask what story is relevant to what. You know, what's the truth of whatever. It's fun. Intertextuality is both enjoyable and enlightening. But as soon as you're talking about the agricultural worlds that maintain Coruscant, or the gendered political motivations of Mon Mothma, or whatever things that the text doesn't explicitly bother with, you too are engaged in transformative fan work. Even information aggregation transforms the text. Wikipedia is not a neutral observer. It's a very particular perspective on what canon is and how it works. So is Star Wars Explained, so is the Lucasfilm Story Group and Pablo fucking Hidalgo, even though they're doing it for the actual company. There is no word of God here. There are people interpreting Star Wars inside Lucasfilm, and there are people doing it outside, and the only real difference is that the people inside are getting paid for it. Because whether it's playing with your telescopic lightsaber, or getting to work on a new TV show, or writing about Han's knot, we all have the right, the fucking duty, if we like Star Wars, if it speaks to you, if it means something to you, to perform it, and rewrite it, and reclaim it. And that's not something that intellectual property law can take away, because the relationship between art and audience is much deeper and weirder, and it's impossible for any corporate entity to dictate that, no matter how hard they try. That's real. That's genuine. There is meaning in that. The Disney lawyers don't have shit on my ability to talk about Luke and Biggs kissing. There's tension between art and the resources required to produce it under our current system, but art is still produced. Andor is still good. Nonetheless, no matter what the people who own it do and are, I still have that work and everything that it means. Every ounce of anti-fascist juice that Star Wars can give is yours, if you so desire to take it. Capital holds power, but it isn't all-consuming. I don't believe it's all there is, and it's not all I can imagine. We still make meaning and form relationships and experience art in transcendent and evocative ways, despite the erosion of the means. And that doesn't mean that it's enough. Watching a sci-fi show is not doing politics. Andor is not enough, and don't you dare allow yourself to be pacified into thinking that it is. But it can be a start for some of you. A chance to flex some of those muscles, to learn to start recognizing what it looks like to win power back, to understand how it can be when things are bad, and to see a way out of it. If we ever want anything to get better, we have to be able to conceptualize that world. There are new generations that are much more willing to treat with how bad things are. People can imagine. People can learn to imagine. Maybe it's pre-corporated, but it's not nothing. It might not be good enough, but it's something. It is real. The value of a revolutionary imagination should never be ignored. And yeah, we live in a consumerist hellscape, and it's not good enough to stay here. But if it's all there is, where else are we to start? The long dark night of the end of history has to be grasped as an enormous opportunity. The very oppressive pervasiveness of capitalist realism means that even glimmers of alternative political and economic possibilities can have a disproportionately great effect. The tiniest event can tear a hole in the gray curtain of reaction, which has marked the horizons of possibility under capitalist realism. From a situation in which nothing can happen, suddenly anything is possible again. My favorite Star Wars movie is The Last Jedi, and it is packed to the gills with nostalgic bullshit. It's a toy chest like any other. It's got R2 and C-3PO, Admiral Akbar and Leia, the dice from the Millennium Falcon, the blue lightsaber from A New Hope, and Luke fucking Skywalker.
See you around, kid.
And it also tries to be something. It's a movie that is in dialogue with its relationship to Star Wars, that treats with modern questions about what we ought to do with icons from the past. Sometimes nostalgia can be toxic and strangling and hollow, but at the same time, old things can have value. They can be reused and retold and appropriated for the next generation, for whatever need and cause is right. Symbols are everywhere precisely because they can be useful. A better world can be fomented on the foundation of what came before. The Last Jedi ends with a group of kids sitting in a circle, playing with toys and telling a story about a Jedi. A story about resistance to authoritarian tyranny. And it isn't just entertainment for them. These children are introduced earlier. They're living in squalor as stable hands, in stark contrast to the wealthy elite in the casinos above. These kids are playing, they're telling stories, but they're also learning and starting to understand what's really possible.
That's an episode. Or most of one.
So, things are going to be bad pretty soon here.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine. I'm a denialist. Actually, a lot of people won't be fine because they're going to start putting, first of all, deporting a lot of people for no reason. Probably they're going to put trans women in men's prisons, which is like a much smaller concern, but also very bad for those people. And who knows? The collapse of the constitutional order is possible.
Sophie, do you have any advice for people in the coming, weeks, months, years? This is going to come out in early January.
I don't know. Get involved not just with like the DSA or whatever, but with like, no offense to the DSA, except in like New York City and like LA and San Francisco, it's like completely without influence. Get involved with organizations that actually have political influence. Like, I don't care if you join the DSA. That's a good thing to join some places. Other places, it's just kind of a, I don't know, I don't want to say wank fest, but...
There are, the biggest, left-leaning orgs in the country are wank fests.
Yeah.
I'm fully comfortable saying that. It's bad out there in that regard.
So, I don't know, join a political organization with actual political power and political capital. I hate to say it, but that could mean the Democratic Party in some parts of the country.
Definitely in some places. Depends, but...
How do I say this without it sounding really bad? Know and be friends with people who will not be affected by the problems that are coming. Mostly that means old white people. Make some old white friends. And I don't know, make sure you have a passport. As like stupid as that sounds. And I very much hope it won't come to the point where that sort of thing is necessary.
Well, our American trans listeners are definitely, I'm not gonna tell you guys to do anything you're not already thinking about. When this comes out, it may well be a matter of months before there are like federal bans on altering sex assignment on federal documents. And get that taken care of if you can. That is important. That is a good thing to prioritize.
I think that the hardest thing will be if you're an immigrant of any sort, documented or undocumented. It's gotten to the point where the university that I have just finished attending is making all of the international students come before the come back to Utah before the inauguration, because it's harder to deport someone than to stop them from coming into the country.
So in a lot of regard, things are gonna be tough if you're trans, things are gonna be hard if you are at risk of pregnancy, things are gonna be hard if you are in a state of economic precarity, if you're not white, all of those things will be force multiplied, right? Largely the way to manage the trauma and mitigate harm both for yourself and others is not to stick your head in the sand or to keep traumatizing yourself by staring at news feeds. Log off. Log off sometimes. I am begging you.
Touch some grass, people.
The thing that will help you is to exercise what agency you have. The best thing you can do is to do something. Put simply, over the next few years, the state will either be absent or unhelpful when things are bad, or they'll be trying to restrict access and movement. There are ways that you can engage with local politics. Sophie already kind of touched on that. There are things you can do that might encourage positive change in your area. I don't think that's a bad thing to focus on, but that's not my field of expertise, so I'm not going to really talk about it. What I'm going to talk about is the extremely foggy concept of organizing. Right? People talk about that. It's like a fucking magic wand on the left to defer responsibility.
It's a buzzword.
Wave the magic wand. Someone who already knows how to do things, take care of it for me. It's okay if you're guilty of this. I've done it too. What actually matters is what your plan is for tomorrow. Now, if there's already an aid or union organization that are around you doing good work that you are aware of, take the leap. Go to the next meeting. Send them an email. Make sure they're not primarily, a wank fest. Make sure that they are not... See what weird geopolitical opinions they have. That might inform you. See how much time they spend arguing about bullshit stuff. Are they basically a study hall? Or are they actually doing stuff?
A great heuristic for whether an advocacy or charity or whatever organization is actually doing stuff is how much time they spend talking about the thing that they're supposed to be doing and how much time they spend talking about other issues. If they are mostly talking about things other than the thing that they are supposed to be doing, they probably aren't doing much.
Anyway, if there are people doing stuff that you think is worth engaging in, check it out. Do it right after the episode ends. I fucking dare you. If you're not seeing that work being done, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that you're gonna have to do it yourself.
Hot loser.
The good news is that you can do it. To organize is not some mystical, unattainable thing. It's as simple as recognizing a problem and getting a group of people to solve it, or even just try. Organizations of people are valuable, not because they're an org, but because they are full of people. And a group of people, no matter how small, will always be more powerful than you on your own.
There's this group of guys, bros really, in Oakland. The bus agency they have there in Oakland isn't very good about benches because, mostly because it's broke, to be frank with you. But so that there's no benches at most bus stops, and this group of bros just go out every weekend, build a couple of benches and chain them to bus stops, and that's their thing. That is a meaningful improvement in people's lives. You can make bus stops.
That's excellent. That is excellent. That's huge. Go do that. Go do that right now.
Yeah, please do, because I really would like to be able to sit down at the bus stop.
Wave the magic wand. Someone else do that.
Yeah.
If you, listener, know how to get people together to go to the bar, or if you know how to coordinate schedules to have a D&D night, that is awesome. You know how to organize people. That's valuable. That's the real thing. You know. Great. Lock it, load, go. First, identify a problem that you want to solve. Are there people who live on the street outside your home that need food or clothes or period products? Are you being harmed by your landlord or employer? Do you know someone who is, Are there local fascists who are trying to stir up shit and should be exposed and shamed? Great. Those are all solvable problems. Start handing out sandwiches. Talk to other tenants inside and out of your building. Start getting dirt on that Nazi guy. You're gonna need people. Talk to your friends about it. Turn to your weekly Helldivers 2 session or whatever. Make it a chance to talk about things that are real, things you want to do locally. That is valuable. Those friendships are valuable.
Ellie, do you play Helldivers 2?
I do not. I don't have the money for it. I'm kind of interested, but I don't got the cash. Do you? I can't remember.
No, I don't really do FPS, but I do quite like the idea of Helldivers.
It seems like fun. It's been a little bit since I got into a shooter. I could stand to these days.
The only one I ever got into was Arma, which is a really nerd shooter, so.
I was extremely into Team Fortress 2, but.
Anyway.
Yeah. Oh, if you don't know people near you, meet some people near you.
Yeah, you should have friends. I'm sorry, but...
You should, just in general, you should have friends, but essential right now.
Yeah, you can't survive bad times without friends, period.
And you can't survive bad times if it gets to material reality when your friends are only on the internet. I don't like saying that because I think internet friendships is really important and really valuable.
Nah, fuck the internet.
Sophie, we would not be friends without the internet.
No, I know, but still fuck the internet.
Fuck the internet, but the internet's useful. But you're gonna need to go outside and meet some people. If you are alt, check out your local punk or metal scene. If you're into that, go to a concert for a fucking mediocre band. Talk to people at the bar, especially if one or more of the bandmates are queer or a woman. There's a big chance you can meet cool people with good politics at shit like this. Go to a queer night at a club or other similar place. See if there's a local Food Not Bombs chapter. Start one if there's not. Go online and find stuff like local Facebook groups and see if people want to meet up. You're gonna have to put yourself out there. It's gonna be hard, but community building is the single best thing you can do right now. Putting work into that is a very real act of love for yourself and for the people around you. When you have people, and I mean anyone more than just you, 2 is enough, 3 is enough, you should meet up. Write a meeting agenda, follow it, so people can take you seriously and you're not wasting their time. Talk about your problem. Make sure you're on the same page and thinking about it in similar ways, right? And discuss potential solutions. And then talk to one another, learn each other's skills, pay attention to the person who's talking least of anyone in the room. If they're marginalized, if they're a woman or they're not white, ask them what they have to say. Usually they will have something very valuable to add that would have gone unsaid if you did not ask them. That is important. Take that seriously because everyone has useful skills for community organizing. I'm serious. I got a list here. Do you know how to operate spreadsheets or set up a doodle poll? Cool. That's a useful skill in organizing resources and people. Are you good at online research? That could be good for better understanding a legal situation regarding whatever you're doing, or learning information about people's landlords or employers, or that Nazi freak. Can you sew? Great, useful. Having a car or being able to drive is an incredible asset, especially in an emergency. Can you do childcare? That's an actual skill. That might make it easier for anyone with kids to come participate so you can both be there. We're adults, people have kids. Are you an artist? Are you a graphic designer? Do you just have a printer? Awesome. It is so valuable to be able to make flyers and paste them up on streetlights and bulletin boards in coffee shops and apartment lobbies. Can you do TikTok? Literally, that could be pretty useful. If you put it in the metadata, those algorithms will show that to people in your area. If you can cook, not even if you can cook like great, if you can cook like mediocre, like good enough for a meal, massively helpful. You don't want your organization to be some like austere, authoritarian freak show. No, show up at a meeting with food you made. People will like that. People will enjoy that. People will want to keep doing your org. That'll help people feel good. And you want to prioritize these types of communal care. Even if you don't accomplish all your goals, it still counts because those are relationships and networks and stuff that you can rely on when you need it. If you're targeted or not, if economic policy starts to hurt you, if climate catastrophe strikes, these relationships can be everything. I know that's a lot of stuff, but like the point is that everyone has something to offer. Moving heavy stuff is something to offer. Setting up chairs is something to offer. And you know, make a list. Find out what your guys can do. Match up the skills of your participants to what your goal will take. If you don't have all the skills you need in your group, see if someone there is willing to learn, because flexibility is also a skill. Take yourself seriously in that regard. It is this type of like person-focused community building with the comrades that you make and with the people you're trying to help that makes organizing, I guess capital O organizing, that makes it valuable. I don't like using the word because it seems so trite when talking about something that is so important. When you're doing it with specificity, when you're doing it with regard to what people can offer, what people care about, the state doesn't do that the same way. Corporations can't do that. But you can. Those relationships and structures can be more powerful than anything those larger systems could do with the same resources. If the next 4 years aren't busy for you, you'll have fucked up. Don't give yourself that to regret. You know, take this time seriously. You're not going to be able to fix your country, but you can help the people around you. You can help yourself. Stop looking for reasons why you can't. Start finding reasons why you can. You can do more. Because you are enough. If you've got money you want to burn, I'm going to put some links to some stuff, probably some queer stuff, some border-focused organizations in the episode description. I'm also probably going to be looking for ways to encourage us as a little tiny Daughters of Ferrex community to do something. I'm not like set in stone on that, but maybe we'll do like a small fundraiser. We're not a lot of people, but it might be better than nothing. Kind of in the coming months. The most important thing you can do right now, if you are unable to do all of those things I just ordered you to do that stuff if you can, then survive. That is the best act of resistance that you can do, especially if you are targeted in some way. It is important that you are here and that you be here in 5 years is important to me. It is important to the people in your life, and it is important to the larger cause of having a better world for people like you.
It is not, however, important to me. That was a joke.
Sophie doesn't give a shit, but good thing it's not up to Sophie.
I'm feeling very omnicidal at the moment.
Many such cases. Anyway, that's my prescriptions. I know that's all very telling you to do a thing, but if you do stuff, if you go out and touch grass and connect with people, or, you know, you interface with the local queer scene or whatever, I want to hear about it. Email us, tell me about it. I want to talk about it on the show. I want to spotlight that. I want to highlight the work that you are doing, because that is work and it does deserve, I don't know, a degree of valorization, I guess. Let me know. Do stuff and let me know about it. I will be so very happy to get to know that that's happening. And that's all from me on that front.
Okay, let's do the thing so we can do a couple emails and then.
Okay, we're gonna do an email here. I wasn't planning on it because I'm exhausted, but we're gonna do it. It's a good one. This one is from Christian. He says, "Hi daughters, it's your favorite totally not in a parasocial relationship listener again." This is our actual real life friend Christian. He lives down the street from me. Bear with me on this. I promise it's leading somewhere. When I was in college, I studied the Middle East, and one thing I noticed especially in myself as well as some other students was a tendency to dismiss Islam as a motivating factor in any way. I often thought that was the easy answer, or the Orientalist one, and it was more interesting to look at pluralistic factors. Ethnicity, gender, political institutions, economic factors, etc. In hindsight, while I certainly don't think a blanket things are this way because of Islam explanation would be the only answer, I did myself a disservice by downplaying what is absolutely, if not the biggest factor, then certainly a big one among many others, and there were holes in my analyses. Applying this to Star Wars in a broad sense. God, I hate the show. Applying this to Star Wars in a broad sense, I see a lot of armchair analysis of the Empire's defeat on Twitter, oh god, that focuses on military tactics, or armament. Think, would the TIE Defender have won the war if they built it instead of the Death Star questions? Institutional factors like the Senate, even the personality traits among commanding officers. What I don't see a lot is discussion about the Force and its role in the defeat of the Empire. I guess my question is, to what extent should we think about the will of the Force when discussing the rise and fall of the Empire and the First/Final Order? And do you feel like popular analysis of the fall of the Empire de-emphasizes the role the Force clearly seemed to play? Should we end every discussion of the fall of the Empire with, and by the way, this was the Force's will all along, like we do with, like, The Lord of the Rings? Or do you feel like there's more to be told, or that there's more that's interesting about the Empire than just the Force's will in seeing Palpatine defeated? Is the will of the Force even the right framework to use here? Fantastic work by you both as always. Love the show, love participating in the Discord, keep up the good work, and maybe come over for dinner sometime. Your friend Christian. Love you, Christian. Thank you.
Look, I don't think we can downplay it. What ultimately caused the destruction of the Empire was not just military victories on the part of the rebels. In fact, rebels were kind of getting their asses kicked until the kind of like a force-willed chosen one, whatever, Darth Vader kills Palpatine. On this show, we kind of love to downplay that because we like talking about politics and occasionally big spaceships that shoot guns. But I don't know, that is like a crucial element, because if Luke and Anakin could escape the Death Star after it was blown up, Palpatine could probably have escaped the Death Star if he had not been killed. And in a personalist regime like the Empire, it's really hard to kill the regime if the person whom the regime is centered around does not disappear.
Sophie, we are, as they say, a house divided.
Again? Oh no.
Christian, I think we overstate the will of the Force.
Do we? Okay.
In regard to the downfall of the Empire. Okay, I'm serious about this. My answer to this probably would have been different a few years ago. Before I started doing this show, before I started really kind of getting into it. I don't believe there is anything concrete beyond the statements of the characters, you know, the Force-believing characters, to suggest that, simply put, the fall of the Empire was the will of the Force. It's not like in The Lord of the Rings. There is explicitly a moment, according to Tolkien, where God comes down and does something.
Oh, is that the resurrection of Gandalf or whatever?
He made Gollum fall off that cliff.
Did he actually? Oh, I never knew that.
Yes, according to Tolkien, which is a little bit silly. Now, did he literally like push Gollum? No, because Tolkien is Catholic. But like, I think that is a stark difference. People talk about Luke making the shot on the Death Star, and like, is that the will of the Force? Yes. He used the Force, certainly. But like, the only difference between him using the Force to make that shot and using the targeting computer is vibes and like his own spiritual conversion. I see the Force as almost irrelevant in talking about the larger kind of tides of political change. One, if the Empire was doomed to fail according to the Force, then the Empire was doomed to fail.
Well,
two, the Empire was doomed to fucking fail anyway. It was a dysfunctional state.
Okay, in that case, I agree with you. I guess my argument was the Empire fell when it did because of the will of the Force. Not the Empire would not have fallen without the intervention of, Force mega dude Anakin Skywalker. The contradictions inherent at the heart of the Empire would have eventually made it fall, but it fell when it did because of Force crap.
My inclination is to hold to the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire orthodoxy, which is to say that at the point of the Battle of Endor, the Empire was already beat to shit. And yes, Vader chucks Palpatine into the hole, but Lando fucking blows up the Death Star without the Force. I mean, like, everybody has the Force, blah, 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 blah. It's not like
sure, but the destruction of the Death Star is not necessarily the destruction of the Empire. If it had had a singular leader instead of a sort of chaotic, confused mess, the Empire could have lost some territory in, say, the Outer Rings, or Outer Rim, and retrenched in the core, and rebuilt its strength until it was able to reassert hegemony over the entire galaxy. It required the death of the Empire to sort of immediately collapse.
Perhaps. I think Palpatine still might have died there. I think there's a good chance that he might have died, but
I don't know. It seemed pretty easy for Luke to escape, so like...
That's true. Luke does get away. But at the same time, is it the will of the Force, or is it Anakin Skywalker chucking him down a pit?
Okay, but the Force conceived Luke. Anyway, this is not really relevant.
Conceived Anakin? Yeah, I mean...
So if
the Force didn't exist, then nothing would exist.
If the Force conceived Anakin, then it follows that Anakin was conceived for a specific purpose. And that specific purpose seems to have been, in the narrative arc of the films, to kill Palpatine eventually, to betray Palpatine. So I don't know. It seems like that's kind of like the Force wills it moment, to me at least.
Sophie.
Yes, dear.
How do we know that Anakin was not conceived by will of the Force in order to foment the rise of the Empire?
Also possible.
What if the Force wants there to be an empire for 20 years and then wants there not to be?
I think you're...
What's the difference?
I think you're reading too much into this.
I think I am taking it as seriously as Christian challenges us to. I also think I am increasingly a Force atheist, which is worrying to me because it means I'm going to have to reckon with that sometime.
How do you be a Force atheist in Star Wars?
I'll manage.
Anyway, there you go. There's my answer. There's Ellie's answer. Christian, thank you for the email.
To be entirely clear, Christian is entirely correct that it is really easy to look at a culture that is not your own and go, oh, this stuff that I'm kind of more unfamiliar with or whatever is less relevant and blah, 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 blah. That's really common. I definitely have my own biases in similar ways. He is right to acknowledge that, and as we all should. So, except in Star Wars, the Force didn't do anything. Fuck it. I like the Force. I like Jedi. I just don't think it's as relevant as the movies insist it is. Is my, I guess, contrarian hot take.
It is a fairly contrarian hot take.
It is. It's. I'm sure I'll write about it sometime. It's fine. I'm right. No one can take that away from me. If you have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com.
If you want to listen to new episodes as they release every 3-ish Wednesdays, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts. You can find sources for this episode on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FerrixPod, FerrixPod.
Thank you to our comrades Joel Miranda and Emerson Reyes for making this episode possible. If you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/DaughtersOfFerrix. I've been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms. Sophie, what about you?
I have been Sophia Dunstan. You can find me, I don't know anymore because it's on Blue Sky now. So it's like the redline_pod.bsky.social for the Redline podcast where we talk about trains.
Well, Ferrix Pod is also on Bisky, but you know. This episode was written and edited by me, Eleanor Mueller. Our background music is by Louis Zong. Our intro was arranged by me with theme by Nicholas Patel. Thanks for listening.